Get someone else, Marine Commander demanded. Nobody expected the nurse to carry the same unit mark. The hallway was already too loud for a man who had not slept in 40 hours. Beds rolled past. Trolleys clattered. Somebody 3 rooms down was asking for water and nobody was answering. Colonel George Harlan lay in the bed near the window of room 114 and stared at the ceiling like it had personally insulted him. His right leg was wrapped from the knee down. His shoulder was bandaged so tightly that raising his arm even an inch sent a bright, burning signal straight through his chest. He had been told to stay still. He had been told to rest. He had been told a lot of things in the last 36 hours, and none of them had helped. The hospital was the Walter Brenton Military Medical Center in San Diego. It was not his first time here. He had passed through this building twice before, once with a shoulder injury from a training incident years ago, and once to visit a man from his unit who had not made it through. He knew the building. He knew the smell of it, the particular mix of antiseptic and recycled air that hit you the moment the automatic doors slid open. He did not like hospitals. He never had, but he understood them the same way he understood most things, as systems with rules, hierarchies, and people who were either in control of their section or were not. He was used to being in control of his. George Harlan had been a Marine for 28 years. He had done 3 deployments across 2 wars. He had led men into situations that would never appear in any official report, and had brought most of them home. His record was long. His reputation was longer. People in his unit did not describe him as warm. They described him as precise. They described him as demanding. Some of them described him, when they thought he was not listening, as the kind of man who could freeze the air in a room just by walking into it. He did not disagree with that. He had built that reputation deliberately, over years, because it worked. Because men who respected your authority without needing to be reminded of it were men who moved faster and made fewer mistakes under pressure. He was not cruel. That was what people who had never served under him did not understand. He was not the kind of man who raised his voice for pleasure or made junior officers feel small for sport. He simply did not tolerate waste, wasted time, wasted effort, wasted potential. He could not stand watching someone be less than what they were capable of being. And in 28 years, that standard had rarely lowered. Even now, even lying in a hospital bed with a wound that had grounded him from active duty for the next 6 weeks at minimum, he could feel it, that constant, low hum of assessment. The way his eyes moved to the door every time footsteps passed. The way he noted which nurses responded to a call button in under 2 minutes and which ones did not. He was not trying to find fault. It was simply how he was built. The door opened at 7 minutes past 8 in the morning. A woman walked in carrying a tray and a medical chart tucked under her arm. She was not someone he had seen before in this room. She moved efficiently, without hesitation, set the tray on the side table, and reached for the blood pressure cuff hanging on the wall mount. "Good morning," she said. Her voice was even, not warm, not cold, just level. "I am your primary nurse this week. My name is Kate Reyes. I will be doing your morning checks starting now." George Harlan looked at her. She had short, dark hair. She wore the standard blue scrubs of the unit. There was a small tattoo visible just below her left wrist, partially covered by the cuff of her sleeve. He did not look at it long enough to identify it. He was looking at her face, and what he was reading there was the particular kind of stillness that came not from shyness, but from control. She was not nervous. She was not performing. She was simply there, doing the job, expecting no conversation from him that was not medically relevant. He did not know why that bothered him, only that it did. She wrapped the blood pressure cuff around his arm and began inflating it. The machine beeped. She read the number, wrote it on the chart, and moved to check the IV line at his wrist. She did each step with the kind of economy that spoke of someone who had done this particular sequence of actions thousands of times and no longer needed to think about it. There was no fumbling, no hesitation, no small talk to fill the silence. George Harlan watched her work and said nothing. It was not until she reached across to adjust the drip rate that he spoke. "Where is the nurse from yesterday?" he asked. "He was reassigned to another floor this morning," she said, without looking up from the IV line. "Staffing rotation. I have been assigned to this room for the week. I would like someone else." There was a pause, small, maybe 2 seconds. She finished adjusting the drip, straightened, and looked at him for the first time since she had walked in. Her expression did not change. "Can you tell me if you have a specific medical concern," she said, "or a documented sensitivity that I should be aware of? If you do, I will flag it with the charge nurse immediately." "No specific concern. he said. "I would simply like a different nurse." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she wrote something briefly on the chart. "I will pass that request to the charge nurse," she said. "In the meantime, your vitals are noted. Breakfast has been delivered. Someone will be in to speak with you within the hour." She picked up the tray she had set down. The one that was not for him, he realized now. The one she had only set there to free her hands, and walked toward the door. She did not argue. She did not ask why. She did not look hurt, or annoyed, or any of the things he had half expected. She simply left. The door clicked shut behind her, and George Harlan stared at the ceiling again. Down the hall, at the nurse's station, Kate Reyes set the tray down beside the counter and pulled out the chart. The charge nurse, a woman named Donna Parrish who had been running this floor for 11 years and had seen most things that a floor like this could produce, looked up from her computer. "Everything okay?" "He wants a different primary nurse," Kate said. Donna set her pen down. "Did he say why?" "No. Did you ask?" "I asked if there was a medical concern. There was not." Donna looked at her for a moment. Kate's face was the same as it always was. Clear, focused, not revealing much. Donna had worked with her for 2 years, and she still sometimes had trouble reading her. Other nurses wore their days on their faces. Kate Reyes carried hers somewhere further inside, somewhere you were not automatically invited to look. "I will sort out coverage," Donna said. "Are you okay?" "I am fine," Kate said. She picked up the next chart from the stack. "Room 116 is due for morning checks." She walked down the hall. Behind her, Donna Parrish sat at the station, looking at the closed door of room 1114, and thought about what she knew about Colonel George Harlan's file. Then she thought about what she knew about Kate Reyes's file, and something in the back of her mind went very, very quiet. She picked up the phone and pulled up the staffing system. On the screen, 2 personnel records sat 3 mouse clicks from each other, and neither of them knew it yet. It was 8:23 in the morning. The day had barely started. Down in room 116, Kate Reyes knocked twice on the doorframe, heard the voice inside say, "Come in," and walked through. She set her hands to work. Her face was steady. Her pulse was what it always was. Whatever George Harlan had done to the air in room 114, she had left it there when the door closed. She had dealt with harder men in worse places. She always had. What Donna had been watching without consciously naming, in the 2 years she had known Kate Reyes, was a kind of competence that did not announce itself. In a unit like this one, where the volume of patients was high and the complexity of cases ranged from the routine to the genuinely critical, a nurse's character was not something that revealed itself in any single moment. It accumulated. It showed itself in the aggregate of 100 small decisions: how you handled the patient who was frightened and did not want to show it, how you communicated with the attending physician when you disagreed with a treatment direction, how you managed the hour between midnight and 4 in the morning when the floor was at its thinnest and the patients who struggled most often chose to struggle. Kate Reyes was the nurse you wanted in the building during that hour. She was not warm in the conventional sense. She did not bring a soft, reassuring energy to a room the way some nurses did, the kind of presence that immediately communicated, "You are safe here," in a way that required no words. She was steady instead. She communicated something different. "I am competent. I will not miss anything. What needs to be done will be done." It was a colder comfort than warmth, but it was a real one, and Donna had watched patients respond to it in a way that was sometimes more useful than warmth. Not reassured exactly, but stabilized. Anchored. She thought about this as she watched Kate disappear through the door of 116. She thought about the specific combination of characteristics required to produce the behavior she had witnessed this morning. Walking into a room knowing who was in it, knowing the full weight of what that history meant, and delivering the morning check without a single visible seam in the composure. Not because she did not feel it. Donna did not believe that Kate Reyes was unaffected by being dismissed. She believed the opposite. She believed that Kate Reyes had been building the structures that contained those feelings since very early in her life, and had built them well, and was not in the habit of letting them show in the working day. That was not the same as being unhurt. She wrote that word on a post-it, unhurt, then looked at it and peeled it off and put it in the bin. Not appropriate. The floor was not the place for that kind of analysis. The floor was the place for charts and medication schedules and the logistics of recovery. She pulled up the afternoon schedule and started working through the assignments. Room 114 would have Paul Garrett. Room 116, Kate. Room 112, the new patient admitted this morning, would need to be covered by the end of the day when the full chart came through from admissions. She started assigning blocks of time, fitting the coverage together the way you fitted any puzzle, looking at where the pieces were, what each one could hold, where the weight needed to go. She was good at this. It was what she was here to do. Outside, San Diego continued its morning. The hospital received its first supply truck of the day. 2 new patients were admitted through the ground floor. Somewhere in the building, a doctor was delivering news that was not good, and someone was receiving it, and the thing that had to happen after it happened was happening. And in room 114, a man who had never once in 28 years been asked by a situation to look at himself from the outside was beginning, slowly, not yet aware he was doing it, to look. The ceiling offered no answers. It rarely did, but it was a fixed point, and a fixed point was what you needed when everything else was beginning to shift. Donna Parrish did not make a habit of going through personnel files for personal reasons. She had been a charge nurse for long enough to know that the moment you started making things personal in a place like this, you lost the steady hand that the job required. Patients arrived with their histories attached, and her job was to treat them, not to know them. That was the line. She had always held it. But something she had seen in Kate's face that morning, or rather, something she had not seen, some particular absence, would not let her sit still. She waited until the floor quieted at mid-morning, when the post-breakfast checks were done and the doctors had finished their first round. Then she pulled up 2 records on her computer and sat looking at them side by side. The first was Colonel George Harlan, 49 years old, 28 years of service, 3 deployments. The last one had ended 6 weeks ago when a vehicle he was traveling in was hit by an IED on a road outside a small town in a region that did not appear in newspapers. He had been extracted, treated in the field, and flown to Germany before being transferred here. His injuries were serious but not life-threatening. His recovery was expected to be complete. The notes from the attending physician described him as a difficult patient, not because he was uncooperative, but because he kept trying to discharge himself before he was cleared. He had tried 3 times in the first week alone. That was one file. The second was Kate Reyes, 38 years old. She had joined the Navy at 20, trained as a corpsman, and served for 8 years before leaving the service to complete her nursing degree. She had worked at Brenton for just over 2 years. Her evaluations were uniformly excellent. She was described as highly capable, calm under pressure, and experienced in ways that went beyond her time in the civilian medical system. Donna scrolled further. There it was. Unit assignment, 2009 to 2013. Field deployment, 2 tours. The unit designation was a string of letters and numbers that meant nothing to most people who were not familiar with the Marine Corps' organizational structure. But Donna had seen enough service records walk through this floor that she had learned to recognize a few of them on sight. She pulled up Harlan's deployment records. The same designation appeared. She sat back in her chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then she looked at the screen again, as though the information might rearrange itself if she gave it enough time. Kate Reyes had served as a field corpsman in the same unit George Harlan had commanded. Not at the same time, technically. The overlap was partial, somewhere in the range of 1.5 years at the beginning of his command and the end of her second tour. But they had been part of the same unit. They had served under the same command structure. They had shared the same unit designation, the same colors, the same chain of reporting. And Kate had never said a word about it. Not when the admission papers came through with his name and rank on them. Not when she was assigned to his room. Not this morning, when he had looked at her and asked for someone else without explanation. She had simply said she would pass the request to the charge nurse, picked up a tray, and walked out. Donna sat with this for a while. Then she called the floor coordinator and arranged for one of the other nurses, a steady man named Paul Garrett, to take over primary care of room 1114. She handled it quietly, without drama, and did not explain her reasons in detail beyond the standard language of staffing flexibility. She did not tell Paul what was in either file. It was not his business to know. But she did stop by the supply room, where she found Kate restocking the medication cart at 11:30, and she stood in the doorway for a moment before speaking. "You know who he is," Donna said. It was not a question. Kate did not look up from the cart. She counted out a set of packets, placed them in the drawer, and then straightened and turned around. "I know his rank and his record," she said. "Yes. I mean the unit. There was a pause. Kate looked at Donna with the same expression she used for everything, that steady, clear, unreadable face that made it impossible to know whether she was moved or unmoved by what was being said to her. "Yes," she said again. "Why did you not say anything?" "Because it was not relevant to his care," Kate said. "His care is what I am here to provide. That is what is relevant." Donna looked at her. She had 100 things she wanted to say. She held most of them back. "He dismissed you," she said finally. "He did not give a reason. Does that not? People make decisions about other people based on what they see," Kate said. "That is not new. That is not specific to me or to this hospital or to him. It happens. You address what you can and you move on to the next patient." She paused. "Room 116 is ready to see the attending, by the way. Mr. Croft has been asking since breakfast." Donna blinked. Then she exhaled through her nose and stepped aside to let Kate pass. Kate walked down the hall with the cart and did not look back. The thing that no one on that floor knew, except Donna now, sitting with a quiet and growing unease at the nurse's station, was what was in the commendation section of Kate's service record. It was easy to miss if you were not reading carefully. It was filed under her field name, which was how the military logged female corpsmen in certain units during that period. The name at the top of the commendation read, Corpsman K. Reyes, no first name expanded, no photograph attached. The commendation itself described an incident from 2012. A patrol had been caught in a firefight in a narrow valley. 3 men had been hit. Standard medical support was unavailable because the extraction vehicle had taken damage in the first 30 seconds. The corpsman on scene, K. Reyes, had worked on all 3 men in sequence under active fire, using improvised equipment because the standard kit had been lost in the initial impact. All 3 men survived. One of them, who had a wound that should by medical probability have killed him within 20 minutes, was still alive because of a decision the corpsman made on the ground that no field manual had ever described, and that the attending physician reviewing the case later said he would not have believed was possible without seeing the outcome. The commendation had been written by the commanding officer of the unit at the time, Colonel George Harlan. It had been filed under his signature, submitted in his name, logged in the system as a commendation from the unit commander to the outstanding corpsman who had saved 3 lives in conditions that the colonel himself described, in his written summary, as the worst hour he had seen in 25 years of service. He had never met K. Reyes. He had written the letter from the field reports and the accounts of the 3 surviving men. He had signed it, filed it, and moved on to the next thing in the long, dense calendar of a commanding officer's duties. He had assumed, because in his experience, field corpsmen in combat roles at that time were almost universally male, because the name offered no clear signal, because no one in the chain had mentioned it, that K. Reyes was a man. Donna found this out not because Kate told her. Kate had not told her anything beyond the bare minimum. She found it because she had gone looking, carefully, through both files, reading the way a person reads when they suspect the document is holding something back. She found the commendation letter on page 14 of George Harlan's service summary. She found Kate's matching record on page 6 of Kate's own file. She cross-referenced the unit designation and the date and the incident. Then she closed both files, folded her hands on the desk, and sat in a silence that felt like the moment between a lightning strike and the sound of thunder. She thought about Kate's face this morning, the absolute evenness of it, the way she had said, "I will pass the request to the charge nurse," and then simply walked out the door without a single visible crack in the surface of her composure. She thought about the letter that George Harlan had written, the language of it, which she had read twice, because it was not the language of a man filling out a form. It was the language of someone who had been genuinely moved by what had been reported to him. He had used the word extraordinary. He had used the phrase, beyond the reach of standard expectation. He had written, in the final line of the commendation, that whoever K. Reyes was, they were the kind of person that made the difference between a unit that could survive the worst and a unit that could not. He had written that. He had signed his name to it. And this morning he had looked at Kate Reyes standing at the foot of his bed and said, "I would like a different nurse." Donna picked up her pen, set it down, picked it up again. She thought about what it would mean to say nothing. She thought about what it would mean to say something. She thought about the fact that she could not unsee what she had seen in those files, and that the question was not whether it mattered. It clearly mattered, but whose place it was to do something about it. Paul Garrett knocked on the frame of the nurse's station. "Room 114 is settled," he said. He's not particularly happy with me either, for the record, so I do not think it is personal. It is not, Donna said. He is asking for his physical therapy schedule. Can I pull that? Yes. Also tell him the on-call physician will be doing rounds after 2. Sure. Paul started to turn, then stopped. Is everything okay? You look like you are trying to solve a math problem in your head. I am, Donna said. Go check on 116 as well, please. He went. Donna looked at the closed door of room 1114 at the end of the hall. Inside that room, George Harlan was looking at the ceiling again. He had eaten half his breakfast. He had done the breathing exercises the respiratory therapist had shown him, not because he believed in them, but because he believed in doing what worked, and they seemed to help the tightness in his shoulder marginally. He was thinking about the schedule, about how long 6 weeks was, about the paperwork that was likely piling up on his desk at the base, about the men in his unit, and who was running the daily brief in his absence. He was not thinking about the nurse. That was what he told himself. He was not thinking about her at all. He was thinking about the ceiling and the schedule and 6 very long weeks. But somewhere in the back of his mind, in a place he was not quite looking, the memory of her face was sitting there quietly, the stillness of it, the complete and total absence of performance, the way she had said, I will pass the request to the charge nurse without a single flicker of anything. Not hurt, not anger, not the particular kind of wounded dignity he had seen in people who had been dismissed before and were trying to hide the damage of it. Nothing. Just a clear, steady, composed departure. He had not seen that in a long time. He did not know what to do with it. He ate the other half of his breakfast, stared at the ceiling, and did not think about the nurse at all. Outside, in a hallway he could not see, Donna Parrish was reaching for a personnel file that had been sitting in the system for years, quietly holding a secret that 2 people in the same building had been circling without ever quite touching. She printed the commendation letter. She set it face down on her desk. She was not yet sure what she was going to do with it, but she knew she could not put it back. What Donna had not yet worked out was what to do with the weight of it, this strange, accidental overlap of 2 people in the same hallway who had once shared the same patch of ground on the other side of the world, and who had now come within 4 minutes of each other without recognition on one side and without disclosure on the other. She had been in medical settings long enough to know that these things happened. Not this exact configuration of things, the commendation, the unit mark, the coincidence of assignment, but the general shape of it, the way people's pasts showed up unexpectedly in the present, trailing histories they had not announced, and identities that the surface of a situation had given no reason to expect. She had treated a patient once who turned out to be a former colleague of her husband's from 20 years earlier. She had once had a patient whose daughter was in her book club, a connection that neither of them discovered until the 3rd week of treatment. Life did that. It folded back on itself in odd places. But this was different. This had a texture that she could not quite resolve, because Kate Reyes had walked into that room knowing exactly who was in it. She had seen the name on the chart. She had read the record. Donna was certain of that, knowing Kate. Kate did not approach a room without reading the record first. She had gone in prepared, carrying that knowledge quietly, and she had performed her function with the kind of professionalism that looked identical from the outside whether the situation was complicated or simple. And when George Harlan had said, I would like a different nurse, she had not used the obvious and available tool in her hands. She had not said, you may want to reconsider that, Colonel, given that we served in the same unit. She had not played the card. She had set it face down on the table and walked away from it. That was not nothing. That was a specific kind of choice that required a specific kind of will. Donna thought about why a person would make that choice. She turned it over the way she turned over difficult problems, not rushing to an answer, just examining the edges of it until the shape became clearer. She thought that Kate Reyes had probably spent most of her career making exactly that kind of choice, not playing the card, not invoking her history as a reason to be treated differently or seen more accurately, just doing the work and letting the work be the evidence. It was a philosophy that Donna had seen before in people who had come from environments where their credibility was perpetually in question, where they had learned, through repetition, that claiming authority was less reliable than demonstrating it, that the shortest distance between what you had earned and what you were given was not an announcement. It was a track record. That kind of person was not damaged by being dismissed, not because it did not register, Donna suspected it registered very accurately, but because being dismissed had happened often enough that they had built their sense of self on a foundation that did not require outside validation to hold its shape. You could not knock that kind of person off balance by doubting them. You could only show them who you were. And George Harlan, this morning, had shown Kate Reyes exactly who he was. The question, which Donna sat with as the afternoon moved and the floor's business moved around her, was what he would do with who he had been shown to be. She had seen patients recover from physical injuries and leave with the same assumptions they had arrived with. She had seen other patients leave changed in ways that had nothing to do with the medical situation that had brought them here. Sometimes the change was catalyzed by something obvious, a diagnosis, a close call, a conversation with a chaplain. Sometimes it was catalyzed by something that would have seemed, to anyone watching from outside, too small to matter. A nurse's tone of voice, an unexpected kindness, a moment of clarity that arrived sideways and without announcement. She did not know what George Harlan was. She did not know whether the structure he had built over 28 years had the capacity to flex, or whether it had hardened past the point of movement. She hoped the former. She did not know. Outside room 114, the day moved forward. Trays came and went. Medication rounds completed. The floor's population of 14 patients did what patients did, endured, improved, complained, asked questions, went to sleep, woke up asking more questions. The work was continuous, and it did not stop to accommodate the specific complicated thing happening in one room at the end of the hall. Kate Reyes moved through all of it with the same unhurried precision she always brought to the floor. She checked on 116. She managed a situation in 109, where the patient had misunderstood his medication timing and needed it carefully explained again, without being made to feel foolish for the misunderstanding. She helped a junior nurse navigate a difficult conversation with a family who was not ready to hear what the attending physician had told them. She did not go back near 114. Paul Garrett did the 6 o'clock medication check on George Harlan. He reported back to the station that the colonel had been quiet, that he had eaten about half his dinner, and that when asked if he needed anything, he had said no and then said, after a pause, "Actually, is there a way to request a file?" Paul had said yes. Paul had told him how. Paul had walked him through the request process with the same even-handed practicality he applied to everything. He had not asked which file. He already knew. It was Paul Garrett who found it. Not the file, not the commendation. Those were Donna's discovery, locked behind her careful silence at the nurse's station. What Paul found was something smaller and more visible. A detail that required no system access, no cross-referencing, no reading between lines. You only needed eyes, and a half-second of attention. He was passing by the supply room at 1:30 in the afternoon when he saw Kate's left forearm. She was reaching up for a box on the upper shelf, her sleeve sliding back 3 inches, and there it was, a small tattoo on the inside of her wrist, about the size of a matchbook. He had seen it before in the vague way you see things on a person you work alongside every day, without ever really looking. He had always taken it for something personal. A name, maybe, or a date, or one of those small symbols people got in their 20s that meant something only to them. He was wrong. He knew that the moment he looked at it directly, because Paul Garrett had spent 4 years as an Army medic before he became a nurse, and he had seen enough unit insignias in his life to recognize the structure of one even at a distance, even in the simplified small-scale version that someone carried as a tattoo instead of on a patch, even without the color that made the original flag immediately legible. He recognized the shape. He stood in the doorway for 3 seconds. Then he said, "Kate." She turned and looked at him. Her sleeve dropped back into place. "Who is in 114?" he said. She looked at him for a moment without answering, and in that pause, Paul understood that she already knew what he was asking, that she had already done this math before he had, that she had been carrying the result of it since the moment she walked into that room this morning. "Colonel George Harlan," she said. Her voice was exactly as it always was, level, clear, unforced. "You served in that unit," Paul said. "For part of my second tour," she said. "Yes." "Does he know?" "No." He waited. She did not add anything. "Does Donna know?" he asked. "Donna figured it out on her own this morning," Kate said. "She is good at reading files." Paul leaned against the doorframe and looked at her. He was a thoughtful man, 33 years old, with a quiet intelligence, and the specific kind of patience that came from having worked in emergency medical care, and from having learned that the things people did not say were usually more important than the things they did. He had liked Kate Reyes from the first week they worked together. He trusted her professional judgment without reservation. He had also, in 2 years, never quite been able to figure out where the professional Kate ended and the person underneath it began, because the line between those two things was maintained with an almost architectural precision. "He dismissed you," Paul said, "without a reason. He asked for someone else. That is within his rights as a patient. That is not what I asked." Kate looked at him. Her hands, he noticed, were very still at her sides. Not the stillness of calm exactly. It was the stillness of someone who has made a decision and is holding it, and is not going to explain the decision just because someone else is in the room. "I know what you asked," she said, "and my answer is that it does not matter. What matters is that he is being looked after. Paul, his physical therapy intake is at 3. Can you make sure the transport chair is ready?" He was quiet for a moment. "Yes," he said, "I can make sure the transport chair is ready." He pushed off the door frame and walked away down the hall. He stopped at the nurse's station, and Donna looked up from her desk, and he said, "You know about her and 114. Donna set down her pen. "Yes." "And you put the file on your desk and you are sitting here not knowing what to do about it." She looked at him. "How did you find out?" "The tattoo," he said. Donna let out a slow breath. "The tattoo," she repeated, as though she could not quite believe that was all it took. Paul sat down in the chair across from her. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Down the hall, the PA system called a room number. A trolley rolled past. The ordinary business of the floor continued, unaware of itself. "She saved 3 men," Paul said, "from his unit." He wrote the letter and filed it without knowing she was a woman. "Yes, and now she is standing in the supply room talking to me about transport chairs." "Yes." Paul put both hands on his knees and looked at the floor. "That is a very specific kind of composure," he said. "It is," Donna said. "What are you going to do?" "I do not know yet." He nodded. Then he stood up. "The transport chair," he said, and walked off to get it. In room 1114, George Harlan was not sleeping, although he had been told to try. He was lying on his back with his eyes half closed and his hands flat on the blanket at his sides, which was what resting looked like for a man who had not properly rested in 28 years of service. His mind moved the way it always moved, through the day's schedule, through the open items on his mental list, through the things that were unresolved and needed to be resolved. His shoulder was hurting, not badly, but steadily. The particular kind of pain that settled in when the morning's medication started to taper, and the afternoon dose had not yet been given. He thought about the men in his unit. He thought about the base. He thought about the projected timeline for his physical recovery, which he had memorized from the physician's report, and which he was privately certain he could beat by at least a week if he applied himself to it the way he had applied himself to everything else in his life. He thought, briefly and reluctantly, about the morning. He was an honest man. That was something people might not have predicted about him, given the reputation, but it was true. He had found in his career that a dishonest man could not command well for long, because honesty and self-assessment were the same thing dressed differently, and a man who could not tell himself the truth about a situation would eventually fail in the field because of it. He had trained himself over many years to look at his own decisions with the same clear eye he used for everything else. He looked at the decision he had made this morning. He could not identify a clear reason for it. The nurse had done nothing wrong. He could review the 4 minutes she had spent in the room, from the moment she entered to the moment she left, and find no single action that warranted complaint. She had been efficient. She had been professional. She had asked a direct question when he made his request, which was the correct response. He had made the request because something about her unsettled him, and when he looked honestly at what that thing was, he found he could not name it cleanly. There was something in her manner, the way she moved, the particular quality of her stillness. It had hit him somewhere beneath the surface, in a place that ran older than reasoning, and he had reacted to it without stopping to examine the reaction first. That bothered him. Not because it was the kind of thing that could not be undone. He had made bad first calls before and corrected them, but because he prided himself on knowing why he did things, and he did not know why he had done this one. He was still turning it over when the door opened and Paul Garrett came in to take him to physical therapy. Physical therapy was in a room 2 floors down. Paul moved the transport chair into position and helped him settle into it without fuss. George Harlan accepted the help with the particular awkward stoicism of a man who was not accustomed to needing assistance, and was managing it by pretending it was simply another operational task to be completed. In the elevator, he looked at Paul Garrett and said, "The nurse this morning, Reyes." Paul looked at the elevator doors. "Yes, sir." She did not seem troubled by the request. "No," Paul said. "Is she troubled by it?" Paul was quiet for a moment. The elevator moved downward. "I would not put it that way," he said finally. "How would you put it?" Paul looked at him then. He was a man of moderate height with an even face, and the kind of brown eyes that did not hurry to reveal what was behind them. He looked at the colonel the way someone looks when they are deciding whether a question deserves the full answer or the safe one. "She is the kind of person," Paul said carefully, "who keeps most things in a place where they do not show." The elevator stopped. The doors opened. Paul wheeled the chair forward. George Harlan said nothing for the rest of the ride. The physical therapy session was run by a therapist named Greg Alton, a man built like a retired wrestler who had the pleasant and completely impenetrable cheerfulness of someone who spent his days making injured military officers do exercises they found humiliating, and who had learned that the most effective way to handle dignity issues was to simply refuse to acknowledge that they were occurring. He talked about range of motion and recovery timelines with the same brisk friendliness regardless of what was happening in the room. George Harlan worked through the exercises in silence. He did them correctly. He did not complain. He pushed past the point where the shoulder told him to stop and reached the point where Greg Alton told him to stop, which was further on, and which hurt in a way that was familiar to him, the productive, forward-moving kind of hurt, not the kind that meant damage. When the session ended, Greg made a note in the chart and said he would see him Thursday. On the way back up, Paul pushed the chair through the hospital corridor. George Harlan looked at the ceiling of the elevator again. His shoulder was burning. His leg was stiff from the position of the chair. He was tired in a way he was not going to admit to. "Garrett," he said. "Sir." "The nurse. What is her background?" There was a pause. The elevator reached the floor. Paul wheeled him out before he answered. "She served," he said, "before nursing." "Which branch?" "Navy, corpsman." George Harlan was quiet. "Which unit?" he said. They reached the door of room 1114. Paul pushed it open and maneuvered the chair inside. He helped the colonel back into the bed, adjusted the pillows without being asked, checked the IV line, and made a note in the chart. He was at the door when George Harlan said it again, quietly, not a demand, something that sat differently in the air than his usual voice. "Which unit, Garrett?" Paul turned around. He looked at the colonel. He looked at the man lying in the bed with his leg elevated and his shoulder bandaged, and 28 years of command in his face, and he thought about Kate Reyes in the supply room, with her sleeve pushed back and her hands very still at her sides. He said the unit designation, the number and the letters, quietly and plainly, the way you say something that is simply a fact. George Harlan went very still. Paul said good afternoon and walked out the door. The room was silent. The afternoon light came through the window at the low, flat angle of 3 o'clock. George Harlan lay in the bed and did not move for a long time. He was not thinking about the ceiling. He was thinking about a letter he had written 4 years ago in a field office with insufficient lighting and too much noise outside. A letter he had signed his name to and submitted, and then filed away in the archive of things that were done and moved on from, because there was always something next, always another situation requiring the next decision. He was thinking about the name on that letter, K. Reyes. He was thinking about the 3 men who had come home. He was thinking about a morning in 2012 that he had only ever seen in writing, the field reports, the medical summary, the accounts from the survivors, and had never experienced directly because he had been in a different position in the same operation, and his section had not gone into that valley. He was thinking about the language he had used in the commendation, extraordinary, beyond the reach of standard expectation, the kind of person that made the difference between a unit that could survive the worst and a unit that could not. He lay there in the quiet of room 114 and thought about the woman who had walked into this room at 8 minutes past 8 this morning, moving with the particular economy of someone who did not waste steps, who did not waste words, who had looked at him when he made his request, and asked whether there was a medical concern in the voice of someone who was genuinely and only asking the medical question. He thought about what he had done. He thought about it with the same clear, unsparing honesty he had trained himself to apply to every other decision he had ever made. And for the first time in a very long time, what he found when he looked honestly at himself was something he did not like at all. He did not sleep. He had been a light sleeper for most of his career, the legacy of years in environments where not waking up at the right moment had consequences. But this was different from the alertness he usually kept. This was something else. This was the particular wakefulness of a mind that had been handed a fact it was not finished with yet. He read the commendation letter 3 times. Then he read the incident report that accompanied it. Then he read the accounts from the 3 men, Danny Pratt, Marcus Webb, Leon Ford, which were included as supporting documentation in the way that field commendations always required supporting documentation. Their accounts were brief. Field reports were not places for elaboration. But in the aggregate, across the 3 of them, a picture emerged. The patrol had been caught in a narrow channel between 2 ridges. The firing had started from the northern ridge. The vehicle they were using had been disabled in the first moment. The extraction window was a minimum of 22 minutes out. In that 22 minutes, a corpsman had worked on 3 men with a kit that had been partially destroyed and had supplemented it with materials from the environment. A distinction in pressure, an improvised seal, a decision about which of 2 terrible options was less terrible, and all 3 men had been breathing when the extraction arrived. He read it all. He had read it before, years ago, when he filed the commendation, but he had read it then from the position of a commanding officer reviewing a report. He had read it quickly, because there were always other reports, always other items on the list. He had noted the outcome. 3 men survived, extraordinary circumstances, and written the letter and moved to the next thing. He had not sat with it. He had not stayed inside it long enough to feel the texture of it. He stayed inside it now. He tried to reconstruct the spatial reality of what the report described. He had been in terrain like that. He knew the particular quality of the silence before a firefight started, how the air changed, how the body registered the change before the mind caught up. He knew what it felt like to try to concentrate in that environment, to hold a single clear thought while the noise and the motion and the sheer physical pressure of the situation pushed against it from every side. And in that, someone had made a decision about which risk to accept, and had accepted it, and had made it work. He thought about Kay Reyes. He had always thought of Kay Reyes as a letter and a last name, the way you thought of any service member you had never met, as a function within a unit, as a role performed well or poorly, as a data point in the larger accounting of a command structure. Kay Reyes had performed the function extraordinarily, and the data point had been recorded and commended and filed. He had not thought, when he wrote the letter, about what was on the other side of the initial. He had not thought about a person who got up that morning, knowing they were going into a bad terrain on a patrol that intelligence had rated as high risk, and who carried the medical kit on their back, and who had gotten to the end of that day with 3 men breathing. He had not thought about where that person was now. He was thinking about it now. He set the file on the bedside table. The room was dark except for the low light above the bed that the night nurse had dimmed on her last check. Outside the window, the hospital grounds were quiet. San Diego at night was never fully quiet. There was always some ambient thread of the city finding its way through. But at this hour, at this distance from the street, the sounds were reduced to a low general background that did not require any attention. He lay in the dark and did not sleep. He thought about the word assumption. It was a word he used frequently in tactical contexts. Assumptions were things you identified, named, and tested. An assumption you had not examined was a liability. An assumption you treated as a confirmed fact was a danger. This was basic operational thinking. He had taught it to junior officers. He had stressed it in briefings. He had taken it apart and rebuilt it in a dozen different formats to make sure the people under his command understood it at the structural level, not just as a rule to be memorized. He had not applied it this morning. He had walked into a situation, had been lying in the situation to be precise, and he had made a decision based on an unexamined assumption. The assumption was embedded so deep in the architecture of his expectations that he had not even registered it as an assumption. He had registered it as seeing clearly, as making a reasonable call. He had been wrong, not in a minor way, not in the way of a small miscalculation that had no consequences, Wrong in the way of looking at a person who had done one of the most significant things anyone in a unit under his command had ever done, and deciding, on the basis of something he had not examined, that he needed someone else in the room. The night was long. The ceiling was the same ceiling it had always been. He thought about 28 years. He thought about how many times, in 28 years, he had walked into a situation and assessed it with the particular confidence of a man who had assessed a lot of situations and had been right enough of the time that the confidence felt earned. He thought about all the things that confidence might have made him miss, all the assessments that might have contained the same error, embedded, unregistered, dressed as clarity. He could not audit 28 years in a single night. He knew that. But the knowledge that the audit was needed sat in the room with him like a presence he could not dismiss. The night nurse came in at 2 and did a quiet check. He answered her questions without turning on more light. She made her note and left. He did not sleep. By 4:30 in the morning he had made a decision, which was what he usually did with the things that would not let him rest. He identified what action the situation required, committed to the action, and allowed the decision to close the loop enough that the mind could finally stop pulling on the thread. The decision was simple. It was the right thing. He would do it when the time came. He closed his eyes. The ceiling was still there behind them. He slept. When Kate Reyes knocked on the doorframe of room 1114 the following morning at 8:07, he was awake. He had been awake for 20 minutes. He had been waiting without quite admitting to himself that he was waiting. She came in with the chart and the blood pressure cuff and the steady economic movements that he had watched once before and had misread entirely, and he watched them again now from a different position in himself, and what he saw was different. He saw a person moving in a room the way a person moves when they are fully at home in what they are doing. Nobody brought him the file. He asked for it himself. That was the part that surprised Donna when she got the call from the medical records coordinator at 4:30 in the afternoon. The coordinator, a quiet woman named Claire Holt who managed the paper trail of every patient on the floor with the kind of careful precision that made her indispensable and nearly invisible, had called the nurses' station to say that Colonel Harlan had put in a formal request to review his own service record summary, the complete version, not the abbreviated intake form. It was an unusual request. Patients could request access to their own records. It was not common for them to want their full military service history delivered to the room, but it was within his rights. Donna had said send it through. She did not tell Claire why. She simply authorized the request and sat with the phone in her hand for a moment after the call ended. He already knew about the unit, she thought. Paul had told him, and now he wanted to see the file for himself. She thought about printing the commendation letter and walking it down to him. She had thought about that several times through the afternoon. Each time she had stopped, because the action felt like it crossed something, an invisible line that existed between knowing something and making it someone's problem to act on. George Harlan was clearly already moving in the direction of the file on his own. The commendation was in the file. He would find it when he read the file. That, she decided, was enough. He found it at 5:47 in the evening. She did not know the exact moment, but she knew the approximate one, because Paul, who had done a medication check in room 114 at 5:40, came back to the station and said the colonel was reading the file and had asked not to be disturbed unless it was medically necessary. He had said it quietly, without any of the edge he usually put in his instructions. He had said it the way a person says something when they are trying to hold something else very still inside themselves. He is reading it, Paul said. Donna nodded. Did he find it? I did not look over his shoulder, Paul said, but he was on page 11 when I went in. The commendation is on page 14. Donna looked down the hall. Keep the evening checks on schedule, she said. Nothing unusual. Of course, Paul said. He walked away, and Donna went back to the charts, and the floor moved through its early evening routines. Dinner trays, medication rounds, shift handover preparations, the low, steady hum of a medical unit that never quite stopped, but dropped into a different register as the afternoon thinned into dusk. At 7:15, Kate Reyes was finishing her notes at the far end of the station. The evening shift was beginning to come in. She had been on since 7 in the morning. In 45 minutes, she would hand over to the incoming team and go home. Paul came to stand beside her. He has been quiet since 5, he said. She did not look up from the chart. His evening vitals were normal. The evening nurse did those. I know. I checked the log. He was quiet for a moment. Then, Kate. She looked up. He asked for the file, Paul said. His own full service record. He is reading it. She looked at him steadily. Her expression did not shift in any visible direction, not toward anxiety, not toward satisfaction, not toward anything that could be easily labeled. It was simply her face, the face she always wore, the one that kept everything at a distance that she alone had calibrated. "All right," she said. "The commendation is in that file," Paul said. "I know. He will read it." "I know that too." "Kate," he said, and his voice had something in it now that was quieter and more careful than usual. "How are you? Actually, right now, how are you doing?" She looked at him for a long moment. She set the pen down on the chart. She looked down the hall in the direction of room 114, and then she looked back at him. "I joined this unit because I am good at my job," she said. "I am good at it because I worked very hard for a very long time, and in some very difficult places. And I show up every morning and I do it regardless of who is in which room." She picked up the pen again. "That is how I am," she said. Paul nodded. He did not say anything else. He went to help with the dinner tray pickup at the other end of the hall. At 7:58, with her shift report written, and her badge ready to hand to the evening coordinator, Kate was pulling on her jacket in the break room when one of the evening nurses, a young woman named Beth Hollis, who had only been on the floor for 4 months, appeared in the doorway. "Excuse me," Beth said. She looked uncertain. "I am sorry to catch you before you leave, but 114 is asking for... He is asking whether the nurse who was assigned this morning could come in." Kate looked at her. "He said..." Beth hesitated. "He said not the nurse from now, not the nurse from this morning either, but the original nurse. He said he is not sure of the name, but she was here first thing, and she had dark hair and..." "I know who he is asking for," Kate said. Beth looked at her. "That is you, right? You were in that room this morning?" "Yes," Kate said. "He is asking very specifically," Beth said. "He is using the word please. I know that sounds odd, but he is... I have not heard him use that word before. In 8 hours, I have not heard him use that word with anyone." Kate stood with her jacket half on. She looked at the wall for a moment, not at anything in particular on it, just at the wall. She put her jacket on properly and walked down the hall. Room 1114 was quieter than the rest of the floor at that hour. The dinner tray had been cleared. The room was dim except for the light over the bed. George Harlan was sitting up against the adjusted pillows, his right leg still elevated, his shoulder still in the brace. The file was on his lap, closed. He had not put it on the bedside table. He was holding it. Kate walked to the foot of the bed and stopped. She looked at him. He looked at her. Whatever had been in his face that morning, the certainty, the practiced command authority, the wall of rank that he wore as naturally as most people wore their own skin, it was still there. It was not gone, but behind it, or perhaps underneath it, something had shifted. She could see it the way you could sometimes see weather changing at the edge of a sky that looked otherwise steady. "I wanted to speak to you," he said. "All right," she said. He was quiet for a moment. She could see him working at something, choosing words the way a person chooses them when they are not accustomed to choosing them for this particular purpose. "I read my file," he said. "Okay," she said. "There is a commendation in it, from 2012, submitted under my signature." "Yes," she said. "For Corman K. Reyes." "Yes," she said again. He looked at her. "Is that you?" It was not quite a question. It sat between a question and a statement, in that particular space where a person asks something they already know the answer to because they need to hear it said. "Yes," she said. He was quiet for a moment that felt longer than it was. His jaw moved slightly, the way a jaw does when someone is holding something in rather than releasing it. "I did not know," he said. "When I wrote that letter, I did not know your first name. I was working from the field reports and from the accounts of the 3 men, and I assumed..." He stopped. He looked at the file in his hands. "I assumed incorrectly, about who you were." Kate said nothing. She waited. "I assumed it this morning too," he said. "When you walked in, I made a decision about what I was seeing, without evidence for it, and without examining the decision." He looked at her. "I was wrong," he said, "and I wanted to say that to you directly." The room was very quiet. The hum of the hospital outside the door was there, low and constant. The light above the bed made small shadows. Kate looked at him for a long moment. Her face was steady, as it always was. And then something shifted in it, not dramatically, not in any way that broke the composure she had held all day, but something eased. Some small, structural thing somewhere underneath the surface relaxed by a degree that, to anyone who did not know her face very well, would have been completely invisible. What happened in that valley, she said, was my job. I did the job. The men came home. They came home because of you, he said. 3 men. 3 men came home because of a lot of decisions that a lot of people made, she said, including the men themselves, including the ones who held the position long enough for me to work. You improvised a procedure under fire that a field manual would not have prescribed, he said, and it worked, and the man who should not have survived by any statistical measure is alive today because of it. She looked at him. I know, she said. I know he is alive. I looked him up when I started here. He is in Portland now. He has 2 daughters. George Harlan looked at her. You looked him up, he said. All 3 of them, she said, periodically, not to contact them, just to know. He was quiet for a very long time, longer than was comfortable. She let it sit there. I owe you an apology, he said, this morning. The request I made, I had no reason for it that I can justify clearly, and when I examine it honestly, what I find is that it was a reflex built on an assumption, and the assumption was wrong. Kate looked at him with the same clear, level regard she had looked at him with since she walked in. The apology is accepted, she said. Just like that, he said. Just like that, she said. You looked at yourself honestly, and you named what you found. That is not common. You do not get credit for it, but it is not common. He looked at her. You are very direct. I have been in enough places where being indirect costs lives, she said. I stopped seeing the point of it. A very faint expression moved across his face. Not quite a smile. Something adjacent to it. Something quieter and less certain. May I ask you something? He said. Yes. Why did you not say anything? When you saw my name on the admission papers, when you were assigned to this room, you knew who I was. You knew the unit. You knew about the letter. Why did you not say anything? Kate looked at him for a moment before answering. Because my job this morning was your blood pressure and your IV line, she said, not my service record. He was quiet. And because, she continued, I do not need anyone to know what I have done. I know what I did. The men I helped know what happened. The record is in the file whether or not the person reading it understands what they are looking at. She paused. I have spent my career in places where the people who did the most important work were the least visible. That was not a complaint. That was the job. I understood the job. He looked at her for a long time. His face had something in it now that she had not seen that morning, something that was not quite guilt and not quite admiration, but lived somewhere in the space between the two, something that looked a great deal like a man who had spent 28 years at the top of every room he walked into and was, for the first time in a while, sitting at the bottom. Will you come back tomorrow, he said, as my primary nurse? If that is, he stopped. He started again. I am asking. I understand it is a request, not a directive. I understand the difference. Kate looked at him. I will check with Donna, she said, if the schedule allows it. Thank you, he said. She moved to the door. Her hand was on the frame when he spoke again. Reyes, he said. She turned. I am glad they came home, he said. His voice was quieter now, stripped of most of its authority, or at least of the way authority was usually dressed. All 3 of them. I was glad then, and I am glad now. Whatever my failures in understanding who did it, I was always glad that it was done. She looked at him for a moment. So am I, she said. She walked out. The door clicked shut behind her, gentle and final, and George Harlan sat in the quiet room in the dim light, with the file still in his hands, and he did not call for anyone for the rest of the night. The thing about an apology, a real one, not the reflexive kind that people offered in professional settings to smooth over friction and move on, was that it required you to stay inside the discomfort long enough to identify exactly what had gone wrong. Most people, in George Harlan's experience, offered the word without doing that work. They offered the word as a kind of shorthand, a social token exchanged to return the interaction to normal operation. The word stood in for the analysis. The word was meant to close the subject rather than open it. He had learned over the years to recognize the difference between that kind of apology and the one that came from actually looking. The actual looking was harder. It was slower. It required a willingness to remain exposed to your own failure for longer than was comfortable. Most people did not do it. He had done it the night before. He had done it with his own file in his hands and 14 years of assumption laid out in front of him, and what he had found had been accurate and had not been pleasant. He had stayed with it anyway, because staying with it was the only way through it, and he had been through enough genuinely difficult things to know that the way you got to the other side of something hard was not to go around it. He had not imagined the conversation would go the way it went. He had prepared for several versions of it. He had prepared for a version where she accepted the apology with the efficient professionalism she seemed to apply to everything, where she said something like "thank you" and moved on to the next item on the medical checklist, where the emotional content of the moment was acknowledged and then neatly filed away. He had prepared for a version where she was more visibly affected, where some of what she had been holding all day came through in the way a person's voice or posture shifts when they are given permission to be something other than composed. He had not prepared for the version he got. She had said the apology was accepted, just like that, she had said, and when he had asked whether it was really just like that, whether she meant it, whether it could possibly be that clean, she had said something that he was still turning over. You looked at yourself honestly and you named what you found. That is not common. You do not get credit for it, but it is not common. He had not expected that. Not the lack of credit. He had not been looking for credit, but the precision of it, the way she had seen exactly what he had done and described it back to him without inflating it and without diminishing it. The truth of it. He had looked at himself honestly. He had named what he found. She had seen that. She had named it, and then she had moved on. He thought about that for a long time in the hours after she left. She had said she had spent her career in places where the people who did the most important work were the least visible, and she had said it without bitterness, without the particular edge that a person carries when they have been cheated of something and know it and cannot quite let the knowledge settle. She had said it as a description of a state of affairs that she had understood and accepted and had not found it necessary to be angry about. He found that harder to absorb than the apology itself. He was familiar with people being passed over. He was familiar with the particular unfairness that existed in large institutions, the way credit moved toward the visible and away from the effective, the way the person who wrote the compelling report about a thing was sometimes more recognized than the person who did the thing. He had seen that. He had tried, in his own command, to push against it when he could, but he had not, apparently, pushed against his own version of it. He had pushed against the version he could see, the version that existed out there, in the general structure of things, in the systems he operated within. He had not examined the version that lived in himself, in the assumptions he did not register as assumptions, in the assessments he made before he had the information to make them, in the initial K of K Reyes that he had expanded in his mind into a male field corpsman, without questioning the expansion. He was a man who believed in looking at things clearly. He had based his career on it, and he had carried, alongside that belief, a blind spot large enough to obscure a person who had saved 3 men from his unit. That was not comfortable. He was not trying to make it comfortable. He sat with it as a fact and looked at it as a fact and tried to understand what it would require of him going forward. He did not believe in gestures as substitutes for change. He had seen too many institutional gestures that existed precisely to avoid the harder and less visible work of actual change. He did not think writing a commendation letter was sufficient. He did not think the conversation the night before was sufficient. He thought both of those things were correct and necessary, and were also only the beginning of an inventory that would take considerably longer to complete than the rest of his recovery. But you had to start somewhere. You started with what was in front of you. The letter was in front of him. Writing it correctly, with the name written fully and without ambiguity, was the first item on the list. He asked Paul Garrett for paper and an envelope at 9 in the morning. Paul brought them without asking what they were for. He was that kind of person. George Harlan sat in the adjusted bed with the tray table pulled close and wrote the letter by hand, which was not standard for formal commendations. But he was not submitting a standard commendation through standard channels. He was writing a letter that would go through the hospital's military liaison office and would be attached, with the proper documentation, to the correct service record. His administrative staff at the base would assist with the formal submission when he returned. But he wanted the letter itself to be written now, in this room, before he left it. He wrote it twice. The first version was good but not right. It was too formal in one place and not specific enough in another. He set it aside and wrote the second version more slowly, choosing each word with the care of a man who had learned that language was not neutral, that the words you picked were never just vessels for meaning, but were themselves part of the meaning, and that a letter written carelessly was not the same thing as a letter written well, even if it contained the same information. The second version was right. He read it through once, folded it, put it in the envelope and sealed it. He did not put it on the bedside table. He held it. He held it until 7:58 in the evening, when he heard the particular sound of a shift change beginning at the nurse's station down the hall, the quiet handover conversation, the shuffle of charts, and he asked Beth Hollis, when she appeared for his evening check, to please ask the nurse with dark hair and the wrist tattoo to come to room 114 if she had not yet left for the night. Beth had looked at him for a moment, uncertain. Then she had gone. He had held the envelope and waited. Kate was back in room 1114 the next morning at 8:07. This was not a coincidence of timing. Donna had looked at the schedule, looked at the coverage, and made it work in a way that required no special announcement. She simply moved 2 assignments, adjusted the sheet, and put Kate's name back in the slot it had briefly left. When Kate arrived and saw the chart, she said nothing. She picked it up, read through the overnight notes, and walked down the hall. Donna watched her go. She thought about saying something. She did not. George Harlan was awake when she came in. He had been awake for a while. She could tell by the way the bed had been adjusted, by the small reorganization of items on the bedside table that a person only did when they had been lying there long enough to need occupation for their hands. He turned his head when she came in, and there was something in his face that was careful, held in a particular way, as if he had rehearsed the not saying of something and was now doing it. She went through the morning checks: blood pressure, temperature, IV line, the wound dressing on his leg. He let her work without interrupting. He answered the medical questions with the same precise economy he applied to everything. He did not offer commentary, and she did not invite it. It was only when she was making the last note in the chart that he said, "How long were you in?" She looked up. 8 years, she said. Navy? Corpsman. 2 tours. He nodded. He was quiet for a moment, and she could see him calibrating something. What to ask, whether to ask it, how much of a line existed between professional conversation and the territory they had already moved into the night before, and whether there was any clear border left now that could be reasonably observed. "Did you always plan to go into nursing?" he asked. "No," she said. "I planned to stay in longer, but there was a situation in my second tour that changed the timeline." He waited to see if she would say more. She did not. "You do not have to say," he said. "I know," she said. She closed the chart. She looked at him for a moment, this man with his decorated record and his particular way of filling a room, this man who had written her a commendation and never known her name, and dismissed her without a reason, and then faced what he had done with the kind of direct honesty that most people spent their lives avoiding. And she thought about how many of these rooms she had stood in, how many beds, how many patients, how many people who were used to a certain position in the world and found themselves suddenly horizontal, dependent, stripped of the daily reinforcement of their authority. Most of them managed it badly. Some managed it very badly indeed. He had managed it in a way she had not expected, and she was still deciding what to make of that. "Your recovery is on track," she said. "The inflammation in the shoulder has reduced. Greg Alton's notes from yesterday's session are positive. He is relentlessly cheerful," George Harlan said. "That is part of the job," she said. He looked at her. The not-quite smile was there again, faint and brief. She had the sense that for him, that expression was the equivalent of a full laugh from someone else, the inner version of a thing he did not often release fully into the outside world. "What is your first name?" he said. "Catherine," she said. "Everyone calls me Kate." "Catherine," he repeated. He said it as though he was reading the missing letter from the old field report. "K. Reyes, Catherine Reyes." The 2-word shorthand expanding at last into the full person. "I should have known that, years ago." "You knew what you needed to know," she said. "The rest was administrative. The rest was a person," he said. She looked at him. "Yes," she said. "It was." He nodded. He looked out the window. The morning was clear and bright, the kind of San Diego morning that came in with a particular quality of light, direct and warm and indifferent to whatever was happening indoors. She watched him look at it and thought about how strange it must be for a man like him to be confined to a room with that much visible outside of it. "I have been thinking," he said, without turning from the window, About what you said last night, about the work being invisible, about doing the most important things and being the least visible. She waited. In 28 years, he said, I signed a lot of commendation letters. I signed field reports. I signed citations. I signed documents that credited people for things they had done. And I am asking myself, this morning, how many of those documents I signed without fully seeing the person on the other end of them? That is a large question, she said. Yes, he said. It is. He turned from the window and looked at her. I do not have an answer for it. I am not going to pretend to have one. I am only telling you that I am asking it, which I was not doing before yesterday. She picked up the chart. She looked at him for a moment before she answered. That is something, she said. Whether it is enough depends on what comes after it. I know, he said. She moved toward the door. Then she stopped, because there was something she had been carrying since the night before, something that had surfaced when she was driving home and had not gone back down when she arrived this morning. She turned. The man from Portland, she said. He looked at her. His name is Danny Pratt, she said. He was 23 years old when it happened. He has been in Portland for 3 years. He coaches a youth soccer team on weekends. His daughters are 5 and 7. George Harlan looked at her. She could see something move across his face, something that was not military, not command, not the composure of rank, something that was just a man hearing the specific, detailed reality of a life that had continued because of a decision made in a valley a long time ago. You know all of that, he said. I know all 3 of them, she said, in that much detail. He was quiet. Marcus Webb is in Austin, she said. He works in construction. He coaches his son's Little League team. Leon Ford lives in Philadelphia. He is a paramedic now. The room was very still. A paramedic, George Harlan said. He said, in an interview he gave for a veterans publication a couple of years ago, that what happened to him made him want to do what had been done for him. She paused. He does not know my name. He described the corpsman as, quote, a person who moved like they had done this before in a worse place. That is the only description he gave. George Harlan sat with his hands flat on the blanket and looked at her. You read the interview, he said. I look them up periodically, she said. I told you. To know they are all right, he said. Yes. He exhaled. It was a slow, controlled breath, the kind that a man uses when he is managing something large and is not going to let it become visible. She recognized it. She had made that breath herself more times than she could count. Thank you, he said, for telling me. She nodded. She walked out. In the hall, she passed Paul Garrett, heading in the direction of room 116, with a tray of medication. He looked at her. She looked at him. He raised his eyebrows very slightly, the universal question. She gave a small, steady nod. The universal answer, fine, all right, moving on. He went to 116. She went to the nurse's station to log the chart. The floor continued. What happened next did not happen immediately or dramatically. It happened the way most things in a long recovery happen, slowly, in increments, with setbacks and plateaus, and the kind of small measurable progress that does not announce itself in the moment, but only becomes visible in the rear view. Over the following 4 days, George Harlan stopped asking about the schedule and started asking about the patients in nearby rooms. He asked Paul, once, whether the man in 112 who coughed through the night had been seen by anyone, because he had heard it from 2 rooms away, and it did not sound like a minor cough. Paul told him the man was being monitored. The colonel nodded and went back to his exercises. He did his physical therapy without complaint. Greg Alton's notes reflected measurable progress. The wound on his leg was healing on schedule. The shoulder would take longer. He did not make another request for a different nurse. He asked Kate, on the 3rd day, about the improvised procedure, what she had used. She told him, clinically and without drama, the specific problem, the available materials, the decision she had made about which risk to accept. He listened the way he listened to everything, which was with his full attention and no interruption. When she finished, he said, "How did you know it would work?" "I did not know," she said. "I knew that the alternative was certain. The improvised option was not certain. Not certain was better." He looked at her. "You calculated that in the field." "In about 4 seconds," she said. "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "That is a very good 4 seconds." "It was the only 4 seconds I had," she said, "so it had to be." He nodded. He looked at the wall. Then he looked at her again. "What made you decide to go into nursing?" he asked. "After the corpse, specifically nursing." She thought about the question. She did not always answer questions like this. She had a habit of deflecting the more personal ones with a short answer that technically addressed the question while revealing almost nothing. She was aware of the habit. She employed it on purpose. But she looked at this man in this room with his file on the bedside table and the morning light coming through the window, and she thought about what it had cost him to say I was wrong, and she thought about what it had cost nothing to keep the short answer ready. "Because in the field," she said, "you work on someone and then they go. You do not know what happens after. You do not see the recovery. You do not see what they go back to." She paused. "In nursing, you stay for it. You see the whole middle part. What I am good at was always the acute part, the crisis part, but I wanted to stay for the middle. I wanted to know what it looked like when people got through." He looked at her for a long moment. "Do they?" he said. "Get through?" "Most of them," she said, "in different ways, at different speeds." He nodded. "I will get through this," he said. Not to her specifically, more to the room, or to himself. The way a man who has been talking to himself for 28 years without realizing it sometimes lets it show briefly in front of someone else. "Yes," she said. "You will." She left to do her other checks. He stayed. The ceiling was the same ceiling it always was. His discharge came on a Thursday, 22 days after admission. He was cleared by the attending physician and by the physical therapy team. His movement was limited but improving. He would continue rehabilitation on an outpatient basis through the base medical program. There were parameters he was required to follow. He understood them. He followed parameters. Donna handled part of the discharge paperwork. Kate was in that morning and was there for the final checks before he was cleared to go. She took the blood pressure cuff off for the last time, made the note in the chart, signed it, and set it in the rack by the door. He had his uniform jacket on over the shoulder brace. It looked uncomfortable. He was wearing it anyway. Some things were not negotiable regardless of medical advice. "Everything is in order," she said. "Thank you," he said. He said it the way he had said most things in the last 3 weeks. Precisely, without excess, but with something underneath the precision now that had not been there at the start. He paused. He was holding an envelope. She looked at it. "I wrote something," he said. "I want to submit it through the hospital liaison. A formal commendation." He looked at her. "The second one, the one with the correct name on it." She looked at him for a long moment. "You do not have to do that," she said. "I know," he said. "It does not change anything about the record." "It changes the record," he said. "That is the point." She looked at the envelope. She looked at him. "Will you give it to Donna?" she said. "Yes," he said. "But I wanted you to know, not so that you feel any obligation to acknowledge it or receive it in a particular way. I wanted you to know because it is your record, and because the name on it is Catherine Reyes, with no ambiguity." She stood very still for a moment, not the controlled stillness she usually employed, something quieter, the stillness of a person who is receiving something they did not ask for and did not realize they needed to receive. "All right," she said. "Thank you." He nodded. He picked up the small bag that Paul had placed on the chair earlier. He moved toward the door. He walked with a slight care on his right leg. Not a limp exactly, but the measured movement of someone reminding their body that the leg had limits right now, and the body was required to respect that. He stopped at the door and turned. "The man who gave you that tattoo," he said. "The unit mark. Was it before or after the deployment?" She looked at the tattoo on her wrist, briefly, and then at him. "After," she said. "When I was out. I had earned it. I wanted it to stay where I could see it." He looked at it. He looked at her. "It belongs there," he said. He walked out. She stood in the empty room. The bed was stripped. The morning light still came through the window at the same angle it always did. The chart sat in the rack. Everything was ready for the next patient who would need this room. She stood there for about 30 seconds longer than she needed to. Then she picked up the chart, walked out into the hall, and went to check on room 116. The commendation letter went through the liaison office that afternoon. It was processed, filed, and attached to the relevant service record. Her record this time, not a summary attached to his. The language was formal and precise, because George Harlan did not write in any other register. But it was specific in a way that a form letter never was. It named the incident. It named the 3 men. It named the decision she had made and described what it had required. And at the top, in the line where the name of the honored service member appeared, it read, Nurse Catherine Ann Reyes, United States Navy, retired, Field Corpsman, 2009 to 2013. No abbreviation, no ambiguity. Donna printed it, because she had been waiting, quietly, for something to do with what she had been holding since the first morning. She printed it, and she put it up in the break room on the corkboard between the shift schedule and a birthday card someone had not yet taken down. Nobody made an announcement about it. Nobody put a frame around it. It simply appeared on the board one afternoon and was there the next morning, and the morning after that. Beth Hollis read it on her lunch break and did not entirely understand the full context of it. She had only been on the floor for 4 months and had missed most of what had happened, but she understood enough. She stood in front of it for a while. Then she went back to work. Paul read it and did not say anything to anyone, which was the response Kate would have predicted, and which, she thought, was exactly right. Kate saw it on a Thursday, 6 days after Harlan's discharge, when she went in to get coffee before her shift started. She stood in front of it for a moment. She read it through once, carefully, beginning to end. She thought about a valley in 2012 and 4 seconds of math. She thought about Danny Pratt and his 2 daughters and his soccer team in Portland. She thought about Leon Ford in Philadelphia, driving an ambulance to the places where people needed someone who moved like they had done this before in a worse place. She thought about the mark on her wrist, which was where she had always been able to look when she needed to remember that she had earned something real. She poured her coffee. She walked out into the hall, and room 114 had a new patient in it now, a young woman with a broken collarbone from a training accident, 24 years old and frightened and doing her best not to show it. Kate knocked twice on the door frame. She walked in. She set her hands to work.